For weeks now, Israel and Syria have engaged in secret back-channel talks, searching for a diplomatic solution to decades of tension. This is mainly over the territory that was captured by Israel from Syria during the Arab-Israel War of 1967. Violent unrest has seized the south of Syria in recent days in a place called Sweda. It's a strategically important province on the border with Jordan and very close to Israel. Here in Sweda, over the last few days, government forces, Bedouin tribes, and militias from the Druze minority have clashed over the last week. More than 500 people have been killed in the fighting, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is a Britain-based war monitoring group. It is the deadliest bout of unrest to hit this region in Syria in years now. The fighting broke out last Sunday between armed Bedouin tribes and Druze militias that control large parts of Sweda. It quickly escalated, drawing in both the Syrian government forces as well as the neighboring Israeli defense forces. The Israeli news media has been awash with optimistic predictions of a limited non-aggression pact or even a landmark peace deal between the Jewish state and the former jihadists who have seized control of Syria last year. Israel's brazen strikes over these past week on Syrian government forces, including in the capital, Damascus, have highlighted the premature nature of such expectations in what is a fluid geopolitical situation. It's also exemplified how Israel is still traumatized by Hamas's surprise attack in October of 2023. But Israel has been buoyed by its recent successes against both Hezbollah as well as Iran, which it believes is backing all these proxies in the Middle East. Now, Israel is more likely to use force to preemptively address perceived threats, even if it means it's going to derail diplomacy. The strikes reflect Israel's post-2023 military doctrine under Benjamin Netanyahu. It's a combination of a very strange mixture of paranoia, which was an overriding feeling after the October 7th attacks, and a sense of power following the successes in Lebanon, in Iran, and of course against Hamas. And the result is there is now a preference for force and the use of force and the demonstrable use of force rather than for diplomacy as the first resort. Israel's intervention in Syria, just as talks between Israel and Syria were gaining momentum, has now prompted some exasperation in Washington. Damascus had been trying to de-escalate tensions, but Israel seemed intent on striking regardless. Marco Rubio, who is the US Secretary of State, has described the Syria-Israel tensions as a misunderstanding. He says that the United States has helped broker a ceasefire, an agreement between all parties involved in these clashes. The specific trigger point or the spur for the current round of hostilities was Israel's actions against the Syrian government and the deployment of Syrian forces southwest of that country. This was to try and contain the fighting between the Bedouin tribesmen and the Druze minority of Syria. Though much of Syria's arsenal was decimated by scores of Israeli strikes last year, and also because of years of civil war, the Syrian government was able to send in troops in pickup trucks and outdated tanks to the south of the country in Sweda. For Israelis, that posed a couple of challenges. The first one was a perceived security threat in southwest Syria, where Israel wants to prevent the buildup of potentially hostile forces. Wary of the new Syrian government, which is led by hardline Islamists, Israel has occupied pockets of the southwest of Syria since December of last year. This in a bid to try and prevent Syrian forces from reaching the Israeli border. Israel's second challenge is not foreign, it is domestic. The treatment of Syrian Druze, which has set off unrest among members of Israel's own small but very influential Druze community. The Druze community in Israel held protests, they blocked roads, and in some cases, they forced their way into the border between Israel and Syria. For now, though, it's unclear how Israel will be to a prolonged military campaign in the southern part of Syria, or if Israeli strikes were really just a short-term attempt to try and quell the fury of the Israeli Druze. Roughly 150,000 Druze live under Israeli governance, and that includes some 20,000 Druze who live in the Golan Heights. The Golan Heights, Israel had captured from Syria during the Arab-Israel War of 1967. Unlike other Arab groups in Israel, the Druze have usually served in the Israeli military. In fact, some of the Druze have reached the rank of military general. Other Druze have even died in combat during the ongoing Gaza war. The possibility of Iran directly entering this conflict is a very complex but a very real possibility. While Iran is deeply entangled in Syrian affairs, it supported the previous Bashar al-Assad regime, whether through the IRGC or through the Hezbollah, its motivation is not rooted in defending the Druze minority. The Druze do not identify themselves as Muslim, but they've been an influential minority community both in Israel and in Syria. Iran has no ideological or sectarian affinity for the Druze. The Druze are a heterodox religious group who are often viewed with suspicion by both Sunnis and Shias. If Iran intervenes in this war between Israel and Syria, if it does so more aggressively, it would be less about protecting the minorities or protecting the Druze. If Iran were to get involved in this war, it would be more about undermining Israel and asserting Iran's regional power. For Tehran, the strategic calculus is very simple. It is to weaken Israel, it is to bolster the axis of resistance, and it is to prevent any normalization of ties between Damascus and Tel Aviv. Syria had been making quiet overtures towards Israel about joining the Abraham Accords. This was also encouraged by some other Gulf Arab countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, but now those efforts seem to be in jeopardy. The renewed Israeli strikes and the Syrian missile responses have hardened positions on both sides. And if Iran were to ramp up its own involvement in this war, it could scuttle any back-channel diplomacy which is aimed at reintegrating Syria into the normalization process between the Arabs and the Israelis. For now, though, the strikes have cast a long shadow over the negotiations between Israel and Syria, and that leaves little immediate hope for any kind of diplomatic agreement. But Israel is most likely still hoping for some kind of limited non-aggression pact with Syrian leader al-Shara. Netanyahu's maximalist call for a completely demilitarized zone south of Damascus may simply be an opening gambit. Ultimately, he will also have to settle for a compromise. Israel could allow Syrian forces to return to parts of southwest Syria as long as al-Shara formally agrees not to attack Israel in a deal that roughly follows the same contours as the deal between Israel and Syria, which was forged in 1974 between Israel and the previous al-Assad regime. For now, though, a lot is still up in the air between Tel Aviv and Damascus. Then the last thing the region needs is yet another full-blown war after almost 2 years of non-stop Israeli wars, first against Hamas, then Hezbollah, the Houthis, and finally the limited strikes against Iran.